My name is Ilara. It's a name that feels like a whisper, like something found in a book of old myths, which is fitting, I suppose, for a life that has often felt like a story someone else started writing. I am 32 years old. I am a partner at a small, respected law firm in the coastal city of Port Blossom. I am a wife to a man whose kindness is the steady anchor of my world. I am a mother to a little girl whose laughter is the only music I ever need to hear. These are the truths I have built for myself, stone by sturdy stone, over the wreckage of a past I was told to forget. For those who don't know the first chapter of my story, allow me to turn back the page. It's a necessary prelude to understand the quiet storm that was gathering on my horizon. I was born into the Vance family, a name that in our old city meant something. It meant tradition, wealth, and an unyielding expectation of legacy. My father, Arthur Vance, was a man carved from granite and ambition. My mother, Eleanor, was beautiful, fragile, and bound by his will. Their world was complete, they thought, with my arrival. But their true joy, the sun around which their universe would forever spin, arrived 2 years later, my brother, Julian. He was the heir, the golden boy, the continuation of the Vance name. And I, in their eyes, became a footnote. A girl, a lovely but ultimately superfluous detail in the grand tapestry they envisioned. When I was 6 years old, that footnote was erased. They took me to St. Jude's Home for Children, a stark brick building that always smelled of lemon-scented cleaner and unspoken sorrow. My mother's hand trembled as she held mine. She told me it was for the best, that I would have opportunities there, a better life. Her eyes, however, wouldn't meet mine. They were fixed on a point over my shoulder, as if looking toward a future I wasn't in. My father wasn't even there. He couldn't be bothered with the unpleasantness of the final cut. I remember the heavy oak door closing behind my mother, the click of the lock echoing in the cavernous hall, and I knew, with the chilling certainty only a child can possess, that they were never coming back. St. Jude's was not a home, but it was a crucible. It was there that the soft, pliable parts of me were burned away, leaving something harder, more resilient. The ache of abandonment became a fire in my belly. I didn't have parents to please, so I set out to please the only person I could rely on, the woman I was determined to become. I devoured books. I studied until my eyes burned. I collected accolades and scholarships like talismans, each one a ward against the feeling of being unwanted. That relentless drive carried me through university and then to law school, where I graduated at the top of my class. The law, with its structure, its rules, its promise of justice, felt like the antithesis of my chaotic childhood. It was a profession where your worth was measured by your intellect and your integrity, not your gender or your place in a family line. In my final year of law school, I met Liam. He was studying architecture, and he saw the world not in terms of what was broken, but what could be built. He saw the fortress I had constructed around my heart and, instead of trying to tear it down, he simply offered to help me build a garden inside. With him, I learned that love wasn't a transaction or a debt, but a quiet, steady presence. We married and moved to Port Blossom, a city by the sea where the air tasted of salt and new beginnings. A year later, our daughter, Maya, was born. Holding her for the first time, I felt a love so fierce and unconditional it was like the sun breaking through a lifetime of fog. She was my proof that the cycle of abandonment was broken. She was my legacy. The past, however, has a long shadow. Out of a morbid, lingering curiosity, I once looked up my biological family. Vance and Son Construction, their company, had become a regional behemoth. They were the picture of prosperity, living a life built on the foundation of my absence. The sting was sharp and surprising. A call to St. Jude's confirmed what my heart already knew. In 24 years, they had never called, never visited, never once inquired about the daughter they had left behind. And then, fate, with its penchant for cruel irony, intervened. Whispers of trouble in the Vance Empire reached even our quiet corner of the world. Bad investments, legal disputes, a crumbling reputation. In their desperation, they sought legal counsel from the best firm they could find that wasn't already tied up with their competitors. They hired Sterling and Croft, the firm where I had just been made partner. My senior partner, a man who knew nothing of my history, called me into his office. He saw it as a challenging, high-profile case, a perfect fit for my skills in corporate litigation and restructuring. He handed me the file. On the cover, in bold letters, was the name, Vance & Son. They didn't know who I was. I saw their names on the client intake form: Arthur Vance, Julian Vance, and a cold calm settled over me. I said nothing. I accepted the case. Not for them. Not out of some misplaced sense of familial duty. I took it for the 6-year-old girl left standing in a cold hallway. I took it to prove, once and for all, that I was not the unnecessary detail they had written off. I was the one they would now have to depend on. And so, here I sit, across a polished mahogany table from them. The air is thick with their anxiety and my silence. They see a lawyer, a stranger. They have no idea they are looking at the ghost of their own making. My work is to save their company. My real work is to face them without letting them break me again, to hold on to the beautiful, peaceful life I built, and to finally write my own ending to this story. Who in God's name do you think you are? Arthur Vance's voice was a low growl, the sound of gravel scraping against stone. He leaned back, his once imposing frame now burdened by a weary slump, but his eyes were still sharp, still accustomed to command. Questioning my judgment in my own company? I met his glare without flinching, my hands resting calmly on the open file before me. The conference room at Sterling and Croft was minimalist and modern, all glass and brushed steel, a world away from the heavy, oak-paneled life he had built. I am the lawyer you hired to navigate this storm, I replied, my tone even and measured. And to do that, I need a clear map of how you sailed directly into it. That requires complete transparency from everyone at this table. A scoffing sound came from my right. Julian, my brother, slouched in his chair, a portrait of petulant entitlement. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled dark hair, a mirror of our father's, but without the gravitas. This is a waste of time, he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. She's a glorified paper pusher. What would she know about the grit it takes to run a real business? My father sighed, a deep, rattling sound of frustration. He rubbed his temples, the gesture of a king whose crown had grown too heavy. The company doesn't need a philosophical debate, Ms. Evans, he said, clipping my professional name. It needs a lifeline. We're bleeding money. The sting of his dismissal was a familiar echo from a lifetime ago, but now, I had armor. Decades of it. Then let me do my job, I said, my voice unwavering. That is the only lifeline you have. Arthur's eyes narrowed, but a flicker of something, perhaps desperation, made him give a curt, dismissive wave of his hand. Proceed. I drew a steadying breath, the scent of fresh coffee and old paper filling the air. I turned a page in the file. Let's begin with the litigation, I said, my voice all business. You're facing 4 significant lawsuits. The first 2 are from subcontractors on the Mariners Point development, alleging breach of contract and chronic late payments. The third is a class action suit from residents of the Willow Creek condos, citing major structural defects. The fourth, and most dangerous, is a wrongful injury claim from a construction worker who was severely injured on the Northgate Tower site due to what his counsel claims was gross negligence regarding safety protocols. Julian snorted. Those claims are always exaggerated. A bunch of opportunists looking for a payday. I lifted my eyes from the page and pinned him with a cool gaze. Exaggerated or not, Mr. Vance, they are backed by extensive documentation. Your unpaid invoices have created a creditor chain that's about to drag you into bankruptcy court. The structural defects at Willow Creek are supported by an independent engineering report that is, to be blunt, damning. And the injured worker? He has a family, a compelling story, and a stack of medical bills that a jury would find very sympathetic. A trial could result in a verdict that wouldn't just bankrupt you, it would dismantle the Vance name for good. Arthur shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The mention of the family name, his precious legacy, had clearly struck a nerve. I pressed on, my voice clinical. Your contracts are another liability. They are riddled with ambiguous language and loopholes. In several instances, your project managers have blatantly violated terms, missing phased deadlines, substituting cheaper materials without approval. This isn't just poor management, it's a pattern of behavior that suggests a culture of cutting corners. That's the kind of reputation that you can't easily rebuild. So what's your brilliant solution? Arthur asked. His tone was gruff, but the earlier hostility had been replaced by a grudging curiosity. He was a man who understood strategy, and he was beginning to recognize one. We need to perform emergency triage, I stated. First, we immediately enter into settlement negotiations on the subcontractor and Willow Creek lawsuits. It will be painful, but it will be a finite loss, far better than the unpredictable devastation of a trial. Second, we conduct a full audit of every single active contract and begin the process of renegotiating them with clear, unassailable terms. Third, and most importantly, we overhaul your company's compliance and safety protocols from the ground up. You cannot afford another incident like the one at Northgate Tower. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle in the sterile air of the room. Arthur stared at the polished surface of the table, his reflection looking back at him, a tired, older man. Julian, for his part, just scowled. That's a hell of a lot of backtracking, my brother grumbled. And a hell of a lot of money we don't have. Right now, I replied, my voice softening almost imperceptibly, damage control is the only asset you have left. If we move decisively, we can stop the bleeding. That will buy you time. Time to rebuild. That evening, the soft glow of the lamp in our living room cast long shadows on the walls. Liam had put Maya to bed, and the house had settled into a gentle quiet, punctuated only by the distant foghorn from the bay. I sat curled on the sofa, a cup of chamomile tea growing cold in my hands, its steam tracing forgotten patterns in the air. Liam sat in the armchair opposite me, his brow furrowed with the gentle concern that was so intrinsically him. You seem 1,000 miles away, he said softly. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. More like 100 miles, back to a city I tried to leave behind. I finally met his gaze, the warmth in his eyes a welcome sanctuary. It's harder than I imagined, Liam. Seeing them. Being in the same room. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. What happened today? I tried to find the words, to articulate the tangled knot of emotions in my chest. I'm their lawyer. I'm supposed to be objective, detached. But how can I be? They sit there, my father and my brother, and they have no idea that the woman they've entrusted with their entire legacy is the child they threw away. Ethically, it feels compromised. Like I'm operating under a false pretense. Liam considered this, his thoughtful silence a comfort in itself. But you're not lying about your abilities, Elara, he said finally. You're giving them the best legal counsel they could possibly ask for. The deception, if you can even call it that, is about who you are, not what you do. In a way, you're giving them more honesty than they ever gave you. I know, I whispered, tracing the rim of my mug. But I keep questioning my own motives. Am I doing this to help them? Or am I just trying to win some silent, decades-old war? Am I trying to prove my worth to the two people who decided I had none? He moved from the chair to the sofa, his arm wrapping around my shoulders, pulling me close. I leaned my head against his chest, the steady rhythm of his heart a calming drumbeat. Maybe it's all of those things, he said, his voice a low rumble. And that's okay. Your feelings are allowed to be complicated. You've carried this wound for a long time. What matters is that you're not letting it make you cruel or vindictive. You're handling this with the same integrity you bring to everything. That's who you are. His words didn't erase the conflict, but they eased its sharp edges. I just don't want to get lost in all this, I confessed. I don't want to become someone I don't recognize. You won't, he said with unwavering certainty, kissing the top of my head. Because you have us. You have this life. This is your truth now. And I'm right here. Every step of the way. The following morning, I walked into the office cloaked in a renewed, albeit fragile, sense of purpose. Arthur and Julian were scheduled for another meeting, a deep dive into the specifics of the settlement strategies. As predicted, they arrived late, their hushed, tense argument trailing them into the conference room like a storm cloud. I greeted them with practiced professionalism, gesturing for them to take their seats. Good morning, I said, my voice crisp. Today, we need to finalize our approach to the Mariners Point lawsuit. The contractor's legal team is pushing for a court date. We need to present a settlement offer before they file. Arthur's jaw was tight. It's extortion, he said, his voice laced with venom. That man, Henderson, he knew we were over-leveraged. He's a vulture. Perhaps, I conceded, but he's a vulture with a legally binding contract that your company failed to honor. We have documented proof of at least 3 missed payments, totaling over $500,000. If this goes before a judge, personal feelings about Mr. Henderson won't matter. The facts will. Julian rolled his eyes, a gesture of pure, unadulterated disdain. So we're just supposed to bend over and write him a check? I'm suggesting we offer him 70 cents on the dollar, paid over a 90-day period, contingent on him signing an ironclad non-disclosure agreement, I replied, meeting Julian's gaze directly. It's a strategic retreat, not a surrender. It will cost you less than a week in court, and it will prevent the details of your financial instability from becoming public record. Arthur let out a slow, weary breath. How much, exactly, he asked, the fight draining from his voice. I slid a single sheet of paper across the table toward him. On it was a single number. He stared at it for a long moment, his face a mask of grim acceptance. And the other cases? I took a deep breath, preparing for the next battle. The Willow Creek residents are a different matter. This isn't just about money, it's about trust. People's homes are at stake. I recommend a combination of financial settlement for the repairs and a public commitment to oversee the work yourselves, at your cost. It will be a powerful gesture of goodwill. Julian scoffed. A gesture? We'll be a laughingstock. No, I countered, my voice sharp for the first time. You'll look like a company taking responsibility for its mistakes. Right now, that's a perception worth more than any amount of money. The injury claim, however, is the one that truly worries me. It has the potential for punitive damages. I strongly recommend we engage a private mediator, someone with experience in high-stakes personal injury cases, to broker a resolution quietly and quickly. You make it sound like the sky is falling, Julian sneered, leaning back and crossing his arms. That's because the sky has already fallen, I said, my voice dropping to an almost whisper, yet carrying across the silent room. We're just trying to salvage what's left among the rubble. If you don't start treating this with the seriousness it deserves, there will be nothing left to save. That night, as I rocked Maya to sleep in her dimly lit room, the scent of lavender and baby powder enveloping us, my mind drifted back to St. Jude's. I remembered the scratchy wool blanket I used to pull up to my chin, pretending it was my mother's embrace. I would whisper stories to myself in the dark, tales of a brave mother who would come back to rescue her lost daughter. But she never came. The space she left behind became a hollow ache inside me. I thought of the day they left me. My mother's whispered lies. This is for the best, my sweet girl. You'll be so happy here. Her face was a blur of tears and forced smiles, her gaze never quite landing on me. And my father's absence was a presence in itself, a deafening silence that told me everything I needed to know. He sent her to do the deed he hadn't the courage to face. I could still feel the cold draft as she slipped out the door, my small voice calling her name until it was raw. I looked down at my own daughter, her chest rising and falling in the gentle rhythm of sleep, her tiny hand curled trustingly around my finger. A wave of protective love, so powerful it almost hurt, washed over me. I would never let her feel that kind of cold. I would never let her doubt for a single second that she was the most cherished, most wanted, most essential part of my world. She was the garden I had built, and I would tend to it with all the love my own parents had withheld. Over the ensuing weeks, a strange and subtle transformation began to occur. The meetings, once fraught with open hostility, settled into a rhythm of tense productivity. I noticed it first in Arthur. His interjections became less frequent, his questions more pointed and strategic. He started to listen, truly listen, when I explained the intricacies of corporate law or the nuances of negotiation. The gruff dismissiveness was slowly being eroded, replaced by a grudging, almost imperceptible, respect. His frustration, however, seemed to be redirecting itself entirely toward Julian. When my brother would offer a flippant or ill-conceived opinion, Arthur's patience would wear visibly thin. A sharp "let her finish, Julian," or a withering glare across the table became commonplace. During one particularly difficult session about renegotiating with a key materials supplier, Arthur finally snapped. "If you had read the original contract with half the attention you give your golf swing," he barked at a stunned Julian, "we wouldn't be in this position." I remained a silent observer of this shifting dynamic. It was profoundly strange to be on the receiving end of Arthur's dawning approval while his own son, the chosen one, bore the brunt of his ire. A part of me, the vengeful 6-year-old, felt a flicker of satisfaction, but the woman I had become quickly extinguished it. This wasn't a game. I wasn't here to sow discord. I was here to do a job. The more progress we made, the more Arthur seemed to lean on my counsel, to trust my methodical approach over Julian's blustering defensiveness. The cracks in the foundation of Vance & Son were becoming impossible to ignore, and I simply kept my head down, focusing on the work. For the moment, professionalism was my shield and my sword. At our next meeting, the shift was so pronounced it was almost jarring. Arthur greeted me with a nod that bordered on warmth. When I presented a detailed plan for the mediation of the injury case, he listened intently, his chin resting on his steepled fingers. When I finished, he looked at me, a thoughtful expression on his face. "That's a sound strategy," he said, the words simple but carrying an unprecedented weight. The unexpected praise sent a confusing tremor through me. "Thank you," I murmured, making a note on my legal pad to busy my hands, to quell the sudden unsteadiness I felt. As the meeting continued, his observations grew more personal. "You have a very sharp mind, Ms. Evans," he remarked, almost to himself, as I outlined the final terms of the Willow Creek settlement. "Decisive. You cut right to the heart of the matter." He paused, his gaze distant. "You remind me of someone." I glanced up, my pen hovering over the paper, a sense of dread coiling in my stomach. He sighed, a long, weary sound. "Your clarity, the way you think 3 steps ahead. It reminds me of my wife. My mother. Eleanor." His voice softened, taking on a timbre of old grief. "She had that same ability to see through the chaos and find the right path. She passed away last year." He looked at me then, his eyes clouded with a sorrow that felt both foreign and deeply, horribly familiar. "She would have liked you." The words struck me with the force of a physical blow. The air rushed from my lungs. The professional facade I had so carefully maintained threatened to shatter into a million pieces. My mother was gone. The woman whose face I could barely remember, whose love I had craved for a lifetime, was dead. And I was learning of it now, in this sterile conference room, from the man who had authored my abandonment. The possibility of ever confronting her, of asking her the single, burning question, why, was extinguished forever. A raw, ragged grief tore through me, a grief for a ghost, for a chance that would never come. I wanted to scream. I wanted to hurl the truth at him like a stone. But I didn't. I swallowed the inferno. I forced my hand to remain steady. I met his sad, unknowing gaze and gave him a single, polite nod. "I'm sorry for your loss, I managed to say, my voice a marvel of composure, a testament to a lifetime of hiding my own pain. That evening, the television flickered in the dark living room, its blue light painting silent, moving pictures on the walls. I wasn't watching it. I was seeing my mother's phantom face, trying to piece it together from a 6-year-old's memory and a stranger's casual remark. Liam came in and sat beside me on the sofa, handing me a mug of tea. He didn't say anything for a long time, just sat with me in the quiet. "It was a bad one today, wasn't it?" he finally asked, his voice gentle. I let out a shaky breath. "He told me my mother died," I said, the words feeling brittle in my mouth. "He said I reminded him of her. That she would have liked me." Liam's hand found mine in the dim light. "Oh, Alara. I'm so sorry." "It's not just that she's gone," I whispered, the tears I had held back all day finally beginning to fall. "It's that I'll never know. I'll never get to ask her why." All these years, there was this tiny, stupid part of me that held on to the idea that one day I would see her again, that I would get an answer. And now. My voice broke. Hearing him talk about her, like she was this wonderful, clear-sighted person, how do I reconcile that with the woman who walked away from her own child? Liam pulled me into his arms, and I buried my face in his shoulder, the tears coming freely now. "You don't have to reconcile it," he said, his hand stroking my hair. "Her story is her story. It doesn't have to define yours. You don't need her answers to be whole, Alara. You already are. You built your own wholeness, remember?" I clung to him, his steadfast presence the only thing holding me together. "I know," I sobbed quietly. "But it hurts. It just hurts in a way I forgot was possible." "I know," he murmured. "Let it hurt. I'm right here." 2 months later, the storm had passed. The lawsuits were settled, the contracts rewritten, the company's finances stabilized. Vance and Son was still wounded, but the bleeding had stopped. A fragile sense of order had been restored. The day of our final official meeting felt momentous. I walked into the conference room with a sense of quiet finality. Arthur and Julian were already there, their posture less combative, more subdued. As I entered, Arthur actually made a move to stand, a gesture of old-world respect that was so out of character it nearly made me stop in my tracks. "Well," he said, clearing his throat as I took my seat. His voice was rough, unaccustomed to the words that followed. "I believe we owe you our gratitude, Ms. Evans. For everything." Julian, true to form, shifted in his chair and crossed his arms, his expression sour. "Let's not break out the champagne just yet," he muttered. "This company is still on life support." I chose to ignore him, addressing my final remarks to Arthur. "You're not on life support," I corrected him calmly. "You're in recovery. This restructuring has provided you with a solid framework for the future. The rest is up to you. It will require vigilance and a commitment to not repeat the mistakes of the past." Arthur nodded slowly, his gaze heavy. "We understand," he said, his voice firm. "This company is our legacy." I held his gaze for a long moment, the man who had so easily discarded one part of his legacy for another. "Good," I said simply. "Then my work here is concluded." As I began to close my briefcase, to gather the last of my papers, Julian leaned back with a smirk, the first flicker of his old arrogance returning. "Well, I guess a broken clock is right twice a day," he drawled, his voice dripping with condescension. I froze. A hot, familiar anger flared in my chest. But before I could form a retort, Arthur's voice cracked through the tension like a whip. "Enough, Julian," he roared, slamming his open palm on the mahogany table. The sound echoed in the silent room. We both stared at him, shocked. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury, his eyes blazing with a disappointment so profound it seemed to suck the air from the room. "Have you learned nothing? Not one single thing?" Julian shrank back, his smugness evaporating instantly. Arthur ignored him, his gaze turning to me. The anger in his expression melted away, replaced by something I had never seen before, a deep, aching regret. He looked at me, at the composed stranger who had methodically saved his world, and his shoulders slumped. "I wish you were my son," he said, his voice low and begrudging, a confession torn from the depths of his patriarchal heart. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The ticking of the clock on the wall seemed to grow louder, marking the seconds of a life's worth of unspoken pain. I looked at him, the man who was my father, and I felt not anger, but a vast, cold clarity. This was it. The moment of truth. Not the one I had dreaded, but the one I now realized I was ready for. I slowly pushed my chair back from the table and rose to my feet, my movements deliberate and sure. "I'm not your son," I said, my voice quiet but resonant, filling the cavernous silence. "And you forfeited the right to call me your daughter 26 years ago, when you left me on the cold steps of St. Jude's." The blood drained from his face. Julian stared at me, his mouth agape, his expression a comical mask of utter confusion. Arthur opened his mouth, but only a strangled sound emerged. The truth was a blow he had never seen coming, and I watched as the realization crashed over him, dismantling his world piece by piece. "You weren't even there," I continued, the control in my voice beginning to tremble as years of suppressed grief and anger finally surfaced. "You sent her. You sent my mother to do your dirty work, to tell a 6-year-old girl that she was being left for her own good. I cried for her. I screamed her name until my throat was raw. And you? You never came. You never called. You never once looked back." I took a shaky breath, the dam inside me finally breaking. "You threw me away like I was nothing, and you built this empire, this legacy for him," I said, gesturing toward a shell-shocked Julian. "You have any idea what that's like? To grow up knowing you were the child who wasn't wanted? And now, after all this time, you sit here and you ask me to save it all for you." "Well, I did it, Dad." The word felt like acid on my tongue. "I saved your precious company." Arthur gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. I saw a flicker of shame in his eyes, a deep, horrifying shame. But before he could speak, I turned my attention to my brother. The look on his face was no longer just confusion, it was a dawning horror. He truly didn't know. "You have no idea who I am, do you?" I asked him, my voice softening with a sudden, unexpected pity. He just shook his head, speechless. "Of course not," I said with a sad, bitter laugh. "Why would he tell you? Why would he ever admit to you that he had a daughter he disposed of?" I straightened my shoulders, the trembling in my body ceasing as a profound calm settled over me. "I did this," I said, my voice strong and clear now, "not for you, and not for him. I did this for me. To prove to that little girl you left behind that she was more than what you made her feel. That she could not only survive, but thrive." I looked back at Arthur, his face ashen. "We're done now. Any thread that might have connected us was severed by you, a long, long time ago." Then, I faced Julian one last time. "This isn't your fault," I told him, and I meant it. "You were a child, too. But now you know the truth of the man you call your father. What you do with that is up to you." Finally, my eyes returned to Arthur, the source of it all. "But I will thank you for one thing," I said, my voice devoid of all heat, leaving only the cold, hard truth. "You taught me exactly the kind of parent I never, ever want to be. And by showing me what love isn't, you cleared the way for me to find out what it is." With that, I picked up my briefcase, turned my back on the wreckage of their lives, and walked out of the conference room without a single look back. The heavy door clicked shut behind me, a final, satisfying sound of closure. Later that evening, the living room was filled with a soft, golden light. I sat on our plush sofa, Maya asleep in my arms, her small body a warm, comforting weight against my chest. Liam sat beside me, his arm around my shoulders, a mug of hot chocolate, my favorite, with extra marshmallows, in his hand for me. The quiet of our home, the life we had built, was a healing balm. I'm so proud of you, Liam whispered, his lips brushing my temple. I looked down at my daughter's serene face, her tiny fingers loosely curled around mine. A genuine, unburdened smile touched my lips. I'm proud of me, too, I said, my voice filled with a peace that felt more profound and triumphant than any victory I could have won in a courtroom. I was free. I was home. The weeks that followed were like the slow, deep breath after a storm. The thunder had rolled away, the lightning had ceased its violent dance across the sky, and all that remained was a profound, cleansing quiet. The tension I hadn't even realized I was carrying in my shoulders, in the clench of my jaw, began to dissipate. Life settled into its beautiful, ordinary rhythm. Mornings were a flurry of breakfast and finding Maya's missing sock, afternoons were filled with the satisfying logic of legal work, and evenings were my sanctuary, wrapped in the warmth of Liam's presence and our daughter's sleepy goodnight kisses. One crisp autumn Saturday, we were at the beach. Port Blossom's coastline wasn't for sunbathers, it was a rugged, wind-swept place of dramatic cliffs and churning gray-green water. Maya, bundled in a bright yellow coat, chased the waves as they retreated, her shrieks of laughter carried away by the salty wind. Liam was skipping stones, his face etched with concentration and simple joy. I sat on a large piece of driftwood, pulling my scarf tighter, and watched them. I watched this life I had built, this love I had nurtured, and a feeling of such complete and utter contentment washed over me that it brought tears to my eyes. This was real. This was mine. The ghosts of the Vance family felt like characters from a book I had long since finished reading. That sense of peace was why the letter, when it arrived at my office the following Monday, felt like such an intrusion. It was on thick, cream-colored stationery, my name and the firm's address written in an unfamiliar, slightly jagged hand. There was no return address, but the postmark was from my old city. My heart gave a single, hard thud against my ribs. I waited until I got home that evening to open it. After Maya was asleep, I sat at our small kitchen table, the letter lying between me and Liam like an unexploded ordnance. You don't have to read it, he said softly, his hand covering mine. I know, I replied, my gaze fixed on the elegant, impersonal paper. But not knowing what it says feels unfinished. I need to know. With a steadying breath, I slit the envelope open. The letter was short. Ilara. I don't know how to start this. I don't have the right to ask you for anything. I know that. But I can't stop thinking about what you said. About everything. I need to understand. I have questions. Not for him, but for you. If you would be willing to meet me, just once, I would be grateful. If you throw this letter away and I never hear from you, I will understand that, too. I will not bother you again. Julian. I read it twice, then slid it across the table to Liam. He read it, his expression thoughtful. He didn't speak, just waited for me. He sounds, I struggled for the word. Different. He sounds like someone whose world has been turned upside down, Liam offered. Part of me wants to shred this letter and forget he exists, I admitted. The life I have is here. It has nothing to do with him. But another part of me, a very small, very quiet part, is curious. I looked at Liam, trying to untangle my own feelings. He's not our father. He didn't make the choice to leave me. He was a child, too, caught in the same web of lies, just from a different side. What are you afraid of? Liam asked gently. I'm afraid of it hurting again, I confessed. I'm afraid of him wanting something from me that I can't give. A sister. A family. I'm afraid of it cracking the peace I've worked so hard to find. Your peace is stronger than that, Ilara, he said with unwavering confidence. It's not a fragile thing anymore. It's bedrock. Whatever you decide to do, it will be from a place of strength, not obligation. His words settled me. He was right. I wasn't that 6-year-old girl anymore. I was a woman in control of her own story. I slept on it, and in the morning, I wrote a short, simple email to the address Julian had included at the bottom of his letter. I agreed to meet him for coffee. One time. We met at a small, quiet cafe downtown called The Daily Grind, a neutral space that belonged to neither of us. I arrived first, choosing a small table in the corner that gave me a clear view of the door. When he walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. The arrogant, smug young man from the conference room was gone. In his place was someone who looked lost. His expensive suit was slightly rumpled, there were dark circles under his eyes, and his movements were hesitant, uncertain. He spotted me and approached the table slowly, as if walking on thin ice. "Ilara," he said, his voice quiet. "Thank you for coming." "Julian," I replied, my tone polite but distant. "Please, sit." The silence after we ordered our coffees was thick and awkward. He stared into his cup, tracing patterns on the ceramic. Finally, he looked up, his eyes meeting mine. They were the same deep brown as our father's, but they held none of the same cold command. Right now, they just looked tired. "I don't even know where to begin," he said, his voice raspy. "I'm sorry. For how I acted in those meetings. For everything." I gave a small nod. "Apology accepted. But I don't think that's why you asked me here." He shook his head. "No. I've been going crazy." I confronted him. "Our father." He said the word with a new, bitter inflection. At first he denied it. Then he tried to justify it. Said it was a different time, that he and our mother thought they were doing what was best for you, for the family name. Lies. All of it. It was about his own pride. His own damned legacy. I remained silent, letting him speak. This was his story to tell, his disillusionment to process. I was merely a witness. "He's a ghost in his own house now," Julian continued, his voice dropping. "The company is stable, thanks to you, but he just wanders around the office. He's broken. And a part of me, the part that loved him my whole life, feels pity. But the rest of me," he trailed off, shaking his head. "How could he lie to me my entire life? How could I have a sister, a whole sister, and not even know?" The raw pain in his voice was genuine. It wasn't about me, not really. It was about the destruction of his own world, the shattering of the father he thought he knew. "I'm not here to help you pick up the pieces of your relationship with him, Julian," I said gently but firmly. "That is between the two of you." "I know," he said quickly, looking down at his hands. "I know. That's not what this is. I wanted to see you. To know you, even just for an hour. To say that I'm sorry that my good life was built on top of your pain. I never knew, but that doesn't make it right." For the first time, I felt a flicker of something other than detached curiosity. It was a strange, muted empathy. He was grappling with a truth that had taken me a lifetime to process. I took a sip of my coffee. "What do you want to know?" He asked about St. Jude's. He asked about my adoptive parents. I explained I was never adopted, that I aged out of the system. He asked about law school, about how I ended up in Port Blossom. I gave him the broad strokes, the facts without the deep, sharp-edged emotions that accompanied them. I told him about Liam and Maya, and for a moment, a look of profound sadness crossed his face. "He has a granddaughter," Julian whispered, more to himself than to me. "And he'll never even know her name. That is a consequence of his own choices," I said, my voice soft but unyielding. My daughter was my sacred ground, and I would not allow his or our father's grief to touch her. We sat for a little while longer. The conversation lulled. He had asked his questions, and I had answered them. The purpose of the meeting felt complete. As we prepared to leave, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out something small, wrapped in tissue paper. "I found this when I was going through some of her things," he said, his voice hesitant. "Our mothers. I thought you should have it." He slid it across the table. I slowly unwrapped the tissue paper. Inside was a small, worn book of poetry by Emily Dickinson. The leather cover was soft and faded at the edges. Tucked inside the front cover was a faded photograph. It was of a very young woman, my mother, Eleanor, holding a baby. The baby was me. On the back, in her delicate, looping script, were the words, "My Elara, my star." 1990. I stared at the photograph, at the ghost of a mother I never knew, and the child I once was. For all her weakness, for all her complicity, in that one moment, frozen in time, she had loved me. It wasn't an excuse. It wasn't a pardon. But it was something. A tiny pinprick of light in a vast darkness. I looked up at Julian, my throat tight. "Thank you," I whispered. He gave me a small, sad smile. "It's the least I could do." We walked out of the cafe into the brisk afternoon air. There was no hug, no promise to call. We were still two strangers, bound by a shared past but separated by a lifetime of different experiences. "Take care of yourself, Elara," he said. "You too, Julian," I replied. And then we turned and walked in opposite directions. That night, I sat with Liam on the sofa, the little book of poetry resting on the coffee table. I told him everything. When I was done, he simply held my hand, his presence a silent affirmation of everything I had and everything I was. I hadn't gained a brother. I hadn't found a family. But I had closed the final chapter of that old, sad story. Seeing Julian, seeing the wreckage in the wake of the truth, didn't undo my pain, but it put it in its proper place. It was a part of my history, the foundation upon which I had built this beautiful, strong life, but it was not the house itself. I looked over at the doorway to Maya's room, where her nightlight cast a soft, warm glow. My house was here. My home, my legacy, my truth. And it was more than enough. The door to the past wasn't slammed shut anymore, but it wasn't open either. It was simply closed, and I had no need to look behind it ever again. I was already facing the sun.